because you lose the privilege of self-defense if you're engaged in conduct that would constitute a Class A misdemeanor. So this nephew and uncle, if they threatened to use force to recover the vehicle before the machete threat, just the defensive property scenario, and they did not have legal justification to do that because the property wasn't taken by threat or use of force, so then their threat of force to recover the property is a Class A misdemeanor. They're engaged in conduct that is a Class A misdemeanor. They've lost the privilege of self-defense. That's awkward. That's not a good place to be. Now, of course, it's within the discretion of the prosecutor whether or not he would choose to aggressively pursue here the nephew who fired the shot. But is it beyond the realm of possibility? Do we not see similar cases where there's a reasonable view that the person was acting in a genuine good faith belief that they were acting lawfully, but nevertheless gets prosecuted, convicted, and sent to prison for the rest of their lives? We see lots of those cases, don't we? Now here, perhaps it's helpful that I generally say it's better for everybody if the person you use force against doesn't die. It may be helpful here to the defense that the thief did not survive the encounter. It's certainly helpful to the nephew here that he did not speak to detectives without an attorney present, because he could say very innocent things that would bury him legally, not even knowing he was burying himself legally. But what if the facts were a little bit different here? What if the nephew was, say, an old retired cop, and the thief was a 13-year-old young black male? You think that might change the political dynamics of this kind of charging scenario? It shouldn't, right? It shouldn't make any difference. But these are the political times we live in. So this nephew is, in fact, under considerable legal jeopardy, potentially murder charges, if a prosecutor wants to be aggressive enough on the facts of this case. Now, we have the whole machete thing. And I found it interesting how the news article described this. Let me see if I can pull up the news article again. Yes, here it is. Let's see. The uncle said he saw the man, the thief, reaching for something believed to be a machete, and that's when his nephew shot him. Now let's envision this. The thief is inside the stolen pickup truck. How exactly would you see him reaching for a machete? I'm struggling to envision how that would occur, because he's inside the closed space of the truck. I mean, maybe the driver's side door was open and the machete's on the dash and you can see him reaching for the machete. So it's good that the nephew's not saying things to detectives that would feel off the possibility that this could be true. By the way, whose truck is it? Is it the thief's truck? No, it's the uncle's truck. Is it the thief's machete? Probably not. It's probably the uncle's machete. So the uncle knows he's got his machete in his truck. If he wanted to fabricate a story about reaching for a machete as a pretext to justify his nephew shooting the thief, would it be hard for him to do that? If he wants to provide cover for his nephew, he knows there's a machete in the truck. I'll just say the thief reached for the machete. Maybe that's what happened, but maybe not. Maybe is it possible there's video of the actual fight and we'll see nothing like anybody reaching for a machete? I mean, you have to presume there's always video in this modern age. Cameras are everywhere, of course. So, and the police say they found the machete at the scene, but they don't say the machete was in the thief's hand. It was beside his body. The thief was charging at the nephew with the machete. There's nothing like that in this news article. So the whole machete thing could be completely pretextual. Certainly the way it's described here is not all that robust. And of course, a machete is an impact weapon, right? So we have the whole question of, well, what was the distance between the nephew and the thief? What were the physical barriers between the nephew and the thief? Was the thief still inside the pickup truck with the door closed? The nephew outside the truck, so he wasn't credibly at risk of the machete? the thief would have to open the door and get out of the truck. And maybe that's what happened, but we don't know those facts, right? So it's not hard to imagine facts that an aggressive prosecutor could craft to characterize this nephew as simply having committed a murder out of anger that this thief had dared to take his uncle's truck. And you're not allowed to kill someone just because they took your truck. There needs to be a threat of deadly force against you. Now, of course, there's facts that could support that. There's facts that may be contrary. So this is a much more ambiguous self-defense scenario than, say, there were witnesses saying objective, not just the nephew and the uncle, witnesses saying, yeah, the thief, he jumped out of the truck with a machete and charged right at him. Okay, clear self-defense, not a problem. Do we have evidence like that? So this is always one of the big concerns, folks, about going to the defense of mere personal property. And I'm not telling you not to do that. The law does have provision for the use of force in defense of personal property. We work hard for our stuff. I get it. It's natural to want to protect your personal property from theft, but personal property law tends to be much more complicated, much more ambiguous, much more variable state to state in terms of the conditions that have to be met. It's not just the 5 elements of defense of persons, folks. They add in additional elements like that the property had to be taken by use or threat of force. Not every state has that condition, but other states have different conditions that are non-obvious if you haven't actually read the defense of property law. So it's very easy to trip over one of those conditions, fail to meet that condition, and have no justification for the use of any force in defense of that personal property. And then, of course, it's not hard for a defense of personal property to escalate into a defense of person scenario in which you might be deemed to have been the aggressor because you were using or threatening to use unlawful force, unjustified force against that other person. Admittedly a thief, but just because they're a thief does not mean you're automatically privileged to use force against them, even just non-deadly force. So again, I don't tell people what to do. So I'm not telling you not to use force in defense of your property. You have to make that decision. I mean, listen, this nephew is theoretically at risk of a murder charge, a murder conviction, and the rest of his life in prison. Was his uncle's pickup truck worth that risk? I mean, I get it. Especially, it sounds like a work truck. You know, you lose your work truck, you can't work, you can't pay your rent, can't pay your mortgage, can't buy food. I understand. You're a tradesman and your truck is full of your tools and supplies and it gets stolen. That's a big problem. But that's not just, you know, somebody's Kia getting stolen, which is bad enough. But I do suggest that you think about the extent to which you're prepared to use force to defend mere personal property today. Think about it ahead of time so that when it happens, when you see your uncle's pickup truck being driven away by a thief, maybe you chase it, maybe you don't chase it. But either way, you're making an informed decision, having balanced the risks and benefits to the best of your ability, and you're prepared to take the consequences for your choice of action. Well-informed preparation to accept the consequences of that decision.